Welcome everyone to a brand new session, series session that we're going to be doing. Little context, I've been here for about a month with John and Maritza setting up the podcast. And we've been looking for a place to do the two of us together and John and Maritza. And we're like, best place is in the kitchen. You have coffee, you have tea, you have good conversation. So welcome to our kitchen and to the Business of Forging Agreement podcast. And my name's Lisa, and sitting across from me is my dearest friend and colleague, John Worthington. So something that I've wanted to ask you about is the idea of spirit expressing in and through our lives. Now, I've read Castaneda, and I've also read your book, The Office of Shaman. Now, you discuss it differently.
Yeah.
So why is that?
Well, that's a kind of a loaded question, I guess.
Probably.
Okay. I think it's in really the reason for the explanation. Okay. For Castaneda and his crew, the spirit was something that was personal and part of their secret knowledge, as it were. I'm not sure that secret knowledge is really an accurate statement about it, but maybe to give you the kind of depth to what I'm trying to say here. In other words, they had a lot of generations of people who couldn't really speak out about what they were doing and why they were doing it. And so they dealt with the spirit as though it was a personal thing for them. And in lots of ways, that's actually true. But it's not necessarily something that's only for, shall we say, brujos or sorcerers or whatever, or shamans or whatever you want to call it, call that type of folk. In reality, how I talk about it is I'm more interested in what the spirit does, not in what I can get out of it. Okay. I take the approach that my life is lots easier if I seek out ways of augmenting what the spirit does rather than seeking out ways for the spirit to augment what I do. And that comes down to some definitions, perhaps, about who I am and who, in any given individual. The I is always a problem because I'm talking to myself, for instance, as a statement.
Right.
Well,
right.
How do you?
You're talking to.
Yeah. Well, which one's the self and which one's the I, and who's doing the talk? What?
Yeah.
Okay. I have trouble understanding that. So. Rather than to make that kind of differentiation, I just prefer to say, okay, look, the spirit has a function, and that's really how you know that the spirit exists, because you can see what it does. Okay, you can see what it does in your life. You can see what it does. Period. Castaneda talked about the same kinds of things, but they talked about it as the spirit manifesting itself. For instance, they would talk about it as the spirit giving them a sign. I don't know that I've ever gotten a sign from the spirit. I can see what the spirit does, though, in anybody's life. I can see that. And so that's the reason I talk about it that way, because to me that makes more sense.
Right, because it's taking it out of that, like, personal to you and out into the world. Is that accurate?
Well, sort of. Castaneda also talked about it being that the spirit did all these things for everybody, but not everybody was able to take advantage of it. I'm not so sure that that's true. I think that the spirit does what it does in spite of what we think. And it's like if we were cognizant enough to be aware of what the spirit was doing with us or through us, then we could probably ride that wave a lot easier. So, whereas Castaneda talks about all the different ways that the Spirit manifests and how it expresses in the world and so forth, I for whatever reasons, I ended up thinking about it in terms of what the Spirit does in terms of a function in the world, not as what the Spirit does as a function for me personally, but rather what the Spirit does as a function in the world itself. So I think that's a major difference between how Castaneda approaches it. I think it's the same entity, if that's helpful.
Yeah, well, it's like the language or that knowledge they had then. That was how. I mean, that's what reading Castaneda. It's like that's what they had to be able to talk about it. I mean, we're in a more modern. I don't
know that that's necessarily true. The wheel of time has certainly moved, and we're not in the same time that Castaneda ended. Castaneda represented the end of an era, I think, and perhaps this is the beginning of an era. I can't really see that or say that for certain, but that's a way to think about it so that it's less confusing.
Right, like demystifying.
Yeah. I don't think that there is a. I think that Castaneda and his folks thought that the Spirit represented a personal power for them, and I'm not really sure that that's true. I think that the Spirit may represent a type of power, but not of how powerful an individual is, but rather how powerful his word can be.
Okay. It's an interesting thought. So,
Okay.
Yeah. Say a little bit more. Yeah. It's like.
All right. Look. Castaneda was all about what the Spirit was showing him. Okay, the Spirit took him to see the man dying in the park. The Spirit took him to do various things. Okay, the Spirit showed him a dream. I think all those things are true for people, but I don't think that that's what the Spirit's doing. I think the Spirit's really trying to create reality.
Right.
Okay.
And, yeah. And so that's like in the office of shaman, you have the 8 functions.
Right.
Which ends in agreement.
Right. Well, let's just say it like this: that an agreement is all those functions. Okay. And you could think about those functions as notes on a scale, perhaps. So that you could think about it as a do re mi fa sol la ti do type of idea. Okay. And so you start with B1 and you end with agreement, and those two things are probably more closely related than what we think they are in English.
Okay.
In other words, to be at one with oneself means that one has to be at one body, mind, and spirit.
So everything has to be up and running, basically.
Yes. Okay, and so an agreement requires that you're at one with somebody else who is at one with themselves. Okay, and so harmony requires that you're at one with somebody else who is at one with themselves, and communication requires that you're doing through communication requires that you're communicating with someone who is at one with themselves. Okay, so I see. To me, it's like agreement is the octave above B1.
Yes, because if you look at a scale, that's actually you're moving to the next
Right.
octave,
Right.
On a keyboard or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Huh. So it's a completion of that
yes,
octave.
of that octave. That's right. It's the resolution of the octave of the octave. Okay.
Okay. But you have to have all the parts to get there.
Well, if you're going to play music, then you have to have all the notes, right?
Right, and that's all there. I mean, there only are eight.
There's only those 7 notes.
7 notes,
and you've got a few more that you can sprinkle in there, so you end up with 12 or 13 notes. Right? I can't remember now exactly what it is. I think it was like 12 notes. But that's what you're doing with. That's what the spirit is doing as well. The color is the same way. Light is the same way.
Right. It's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum. It's a vibrational spectrum. Okay?
Right. Okay.
And we're tuned to this middle C or green light, if you like, as a center of what it is that we do and what we can see, what we can hear. So if you think about it from that perspective and you say, okay, well, the spirit must be expressing through me in that same way, then those functions then become ways of measuring what the spirit is trying to accomplish. Okay. And it doesn't mean it's kind of like my computer, right? My computer does all kinds of things, and it doesn't need me to do most of it.
No, it does it all on its own.
Yeah, I mean, I can say, okay, hey Siri, and it'll go do something, right? Well, in some ways, I think of the spirit as being the computer operator from that perspective.
Okay.
Okay. And therefore, if I deal with myself as a computer, as a biocomputer, and the spirit being the computer operator, then I don't think I have that much of a space to say, well, this is what I want.
True.
Okay. I'm in a place where I can say, this is what I'm doing. Is this useful for you there perhaps? So if the meta programs were changed, I could do this better. Or if the programs, I got different apps, I would be more useful. Okay, well, I can go to the app store. It's okay.
Yeah, that's a great analogy to be able to see how that functions in the world, in like our everyday world.
Mm-hmm. And so if you stopped and you took that as a basic premise, not as true, but as if it might possibly be true.
Right.
Okay. If you just stopped and considered it from that perspective, then you say, okay, what is this whole thing about spirituality and the church and history and what is all this about? And if you look at it, it appears that the spirit is trying to make reality. Okay, it's engaged in building real things, and sometimes it's kind of like playing Jenga. Sometimes you can just take out the wrong thing, it all collapses, and you got to start over again, right? Yeah. And apparently, the spirit can make mistakes there too with what it builds in terms of reality.
So why is that though? I mean, what's going on?
Well, it makes mistakes the same as we do.
Interesting. So it's like what it has to work with.
Well,
maybe.
It isn't that so much because what it has to work with is energy, the same as anybody does or anything does. Energy is what we measure it all with, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And if you stop and you think about the body itself, okay, there's a life energy that we refer to. Okay, sometimes we talk about it in terms of it being the chi or something of that nature. Sometimes we talk about it in terms of just being alive, or let's just leave it with those. But what happens really is that if the spirit is not in the body, there's no life.
Right.
Okay, so that energy that funds us, the awareness and so forth, comes from something that's outside of us, that's connected to us, but is actually plugged in somewhere else. One way I've thought about it, I don't know if this to be completely accurate or not, but it seems to, for me, it's an effective theory that the spirit seems to be existent on other dimensions, on other dimension other than where the three dimensions that I can pay attention to.
Right, and I mean that's scientifically proven that there's more than.
Well, there's more dimensions, certainly.
Yeah.
But the thing is that perhaps what I'm looking at is the spirit in terms of where I can see it in these three dimensions. Mm-hmm. I've mentioned this before in these podcasts that there's this wonderful little short film called Flatland, mm-hmm. and it shows what it shows is it shows somebody living on two dimensions like here, right? And so if you take this cup and you take it and you put it down on those two dimensions, what it looks like is a round circle to somebody only on the two dimensions, right? Mm-hmm. You can't really see anything other than the round place where the cup is, okay? But if you could get them to see three dimensions, then they'd see this huge cup looming over them here. Well, that would be frightening.
Oh shit!
So in a way, maybe that's kind of what we're looking at here. It's the same thing of thinking about what we see in terms of subatomic atomic particles. A very interesting theory about that is that we only see them in this dimension. That they may be multidimensional, they may be traveling through other dimensions as we only see them for the moments in time that they're in our dimension. Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes a lot of sense in lots of ways, because, well, it kind of lets us scoot under proving things in a way.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, there was a saying that there's more unknown than known.
Well, yeah, but that's just I think that's just simply a result of human condition. You know, we have a finite brain, and we have we have this nearly infinite universe.
Yeah.
Okay, and if there's other dimensions and we haven't even considered, we might be missing a lot. That could happen. So that I think that's something that we need to consider.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that answers more or less why it is that I talk about spirit differently than Castaneda does.
Okay.
Okay.
I know there's something you want to get into, like spirit and religion and how that works.
Well, I don't know that you can talk about spirit without talking about religion to a certain extent.
Well, one of the things that we've had discussions on is the Council of Nicaea.
Yeah, I think before we go to there, though, I think that it's necessary to understand something that Lily talks about in terms of spirit. Okay. Because Lily says that there's this non-physical entity that's tied to the physical apparatus. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And part of it resides in the physical or with the physical apparatus, and part of it resides in the soul, spirit, God region, whatever that means. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I don't know that that's really a definition or anything, but I do think that it gives us a place to consider that this biocomputer has a power source that is not visible to us in reality. Although we can see its effects all over the place if we pause long enough to observe it. Mm-hmm. True. I was fortunate enough to grow up in in a community where I could observe a missionary training camp.
Okay.
Okay. And people from all over the world came to this training camp, and they spent a year there. And the challenge was to spend a year there on faith alone. That was the challenge, okay? Because they said that the missionary trainers said, okay, if you're going to go to the mission field, you go out in the jungle, you're going to go out wherever you go to, you're not going to get a job out there. Okay, and you don't know enough to go hunting for your supper. So you're going to have to be supported somehow or the other. So you better get used to having the faith that is going to be there. And we want to see if you actually possess that type of faith. So they put people through this training session, and whole families would go through this session for a year.
Wow.
Well, the reason why I could observe that was because those missionary people came out to preach it or to pastor a church that was nearby. But I lived in a farm community up in northeastern Pennsylvania. It wasn't very big, and so we had to have faith too, but it's faith in what we did. Because we had to grow everything that we ate.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we bought sugar and we bought bread sometimes. We bought salt, and sometimes we buy oatmeal and stuff like that. But eggs, no, we grew those. Bacon, we grew that. Steaks, we grew those. Tomato sauce, we made that from the tomatoes that we grew in the garden, and so on and so forth. Okay, so strawberries. Well, do you want wild strawberries? You want or you want the
exactly?
What kind of you want blueberry jelly? Oh, well, great. We'll go pick some blueberries then.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was also a faith type of life, I think. But it was faith. It was a different kind of faith than what those missionaries had. And so as I grew older, I became curious about what the difference was. And so for me, I had to consider that what they called the Holy Spirit was not necessarily holy, but perhaps a common experience for all kinds of people, with all people perhaps. And the people that they were saving, they'd go out to the mission field and they would save a group of people, they said, because they preached Jesus to them, and people could see that the way that Jesus taught was better than the way that they were living. Because in reality, what Jesus taught was that you could forgive it. You could forgive a sin.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
And even that's a very powerful idea, without a doubt. I mean, it is. It's an enormously powerful idea, because if you can forgive a sin, then you don't have to make a federal case out of things. This eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing causes wars and that and other calamities.
Right, as we're currently seeing in the world.
Well, we've been seeing that in the world for a couple thousand years or longer, I think. People have been going to battle and warring with each other over
silly things.
Well, some of them are silly, some of them aren't so silly, I guess. But they're going to war over things that I think they can resolve in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, in reality, when I began to think about, when I was introduced to first of all to Silva mind control, and they talked about programming, but they thought that the programming should be is something that you should do to somebody else, or for somebody else, perhaps. And I couldn't really see that, because I didn't see how that you could write a program that would fit for me, because your experiences are different than my experiences. Okay, so I can never understand how anybody thought they could actually do that, because that conflict of ideas are going to cause the program to explode. not to work right.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, one of those.
Yeah.
So the thing is that what really took place for me was that I'd stop and think about, okay, if the Spirit is something that's common to all of us, then it's been common to all of us from the beginning. It's not something that we learn. It's not something that we're empowered with. It's something that is present in us all the time. And so, like the early Christian doctrine and church etiquette, like in the Acts, when you read deep into the text of the Acts, what you see in the early church or the early Christian church is that there was all kinds of manifestations of what they called the Spirit. And if you read the histories of that time, there were a lot of guys that were doing Jesus-like stuff. There's not just Jesus was doing that kind of stuff. There were other guys that were doing things rather similar. Mm-hmm. But Jesus also said, okay, look, you got to be able to forgive. You got to be able to put it down and forget about it. Because if you don't, it eats you.
Exactly.
Okay, and so when I got to thinking about that, I was saying, okay, well, how is it that is a spiritual concept? How is it that relates to spirituality? Because that's the argument, right?
Right.
For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, who shall believeth in Him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Yep. Okay, and what was the everlasting life? Was that He could forgive. That you didn't have to live in sin. Yeah. Paul made it more clear. He said, "What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Oh, God forbid! How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein?" Well, if you start looking at those concepts, you say, okay, well, what in the world are those boys talking about, really? Because they didn't have the same set of models that we have. Yeah. Okay. They didn't. They just didn't have that. They had the models that they had they weren't very good models.
Upgrade.
And it's like they didn't have a computer model, for instance.
Right.
Not that the Spirit is related to the computer model, but if you have the computer model, then you can see a lot easier what the sin is.
Ah, interesting.
Because the sin is a conflict in the code. Right.
If you can adjust the code.
If you can adjust the code, then you can adjust the behavior. Yeah. Okay, so we've been going on for 2,000 years trying to adjust the code without knowing what the hell we were trying to adjust.
Yes.
Okay.
kind of hit and miss here. Well, maybe there. I don't know.
Well, we knew that it was related to belief, okay? And so what we did is we created this artificial edifice called belief, okay? And we said, okay, I believe in Jesus, and because I believe in Jesus, I'm saved. Okay, right. Okay, that's the Clip Note version of that particular issue. Yeah. Well, if you go back then and you start looking at history, which is what you were alluding to, and you say, okay, why was the Council of Nicaea called to begin with? Yeah. Okay, and if you think about what was going on in history at that point in time, Rome was being pillaged and just I mean, they were on the streets were on fire, really, and the war was between the Christians and the pagans. Kind of like the Democrats and Republicans in a way, I guess. Okay.
I like that. Yeah.
Okay. And so Constantine, who was the emperor, lived in Istanbul, which is now Constantinople, but at that time it was Istanbul, and that's where the capital of Rome, the Roman Empire, was at that time. It wasn't in Rome, but all this destruction was going on in Rome, and so he said, "Okay, look, boys, you Christian guys are making inroads here politically and so forth, but if you're going to continue to have this, if we're going to continue to have these wars like this and this destruction that you guys are bringing about, I'm going to have to kind of stomp on you here. And I'm the emperor of Rome, and I can do that. So I'll tell you what, I'll give you guys a chance here to straighten this out." And so the bishops at the time of the various churches got together, and they said, "Okay, well, let's have us a confab about what this is about, and let's see if we can't unify ourselves," because there were Gnostics at that time that were living a certain way, and there were just a whole lot of different sects of Christian belief, and everybody was following through to the nth degree on their concepts of it. Well, at the end of the day, what happened is that they got together and they made agreements about how to get along and how to put all this kind of under one roof. Except they had one sticking point, and that was what to do about the Spirit. Okay, the Spirit, because the problem that they had is that people were expressing the Spirit, and they called it the Holy Spirit. Okay, there was laying on of hands, and there was healing, and there was all kinds of stuff that people were practicing. Okay, speaking in tongues, and just all kinds of crazy stuff that was going on in these churches, and people were saying, okay, this demonstrates my power of I'm close to God because I have this spiritual thing that's happening, and I'm going to call it the Holy Spirit. And so they argued about that for about 13 days. And so at the end of time, what they said at the end of that time, what they said is, okay, look, we got to get an agreement here that's going to hold. So we're going to say that the Spirit it belongs to it's part of God itself, God Himself. There's God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And the only thing that just is going to send you to hell in a handbasket and you're not going to ever get out is a sin against the Holy Spirit. And so what they did is they put the kibosh on things like talking in tongues and doing those kinds of magical things with the Spirit. Now, were they right or wrong about that? I don't know. And to tell you the truth, I don't really care. All right. From my perspective, I think that they had to do that. I don't think they had any choice, because otherwise the entire idea would have died, because Constantine was right. They couldn't continue to do what they were doing.
Yeah, because it was so destructive.
Right. Yeah. So they had to have some kind of a discipline. And so what they did is they put the Holy Spirit under the auspices of the church itself. And so then they unified the church, and they said, okay, there'll be a church, which became the Catholic Church eventually. But it wasn't infallible. It's still not infallible. Yeah. Okay. And even though it represents a huge segment of the world population and so forth, and it's very powerful political and spiritual body, it still doesn't represent what's actually taking place in terms of the Spirit. Even though it may actually, it doesn't in everyday life. Okay, in other words, Jose and Maria, who go down to the Catholic Church down here, don't get any direct benefit from the Spirit itself, and I'm not so sure that that's a good thing. I think that if they were to see what the Spirit was doing, or could see what the function of the Spirit is, they would be able to better serve themselves and their community. Okay. And their community is part of the church is part of their community. There's no doubt about that. But from my perspective, I think that it's better to say, okay, the Spirit has functions, and we can access those functions through things that we do, not through good works, but things that we do. Okay. For instance, if we address our programming, if we can say that rather than saying, well, I'm not going to sin, if I could adjust my program and say, okay, I got crossways with my mom when I was a little kid, and I think that I should talk down to women because I'm mad at mommy. And if I could recognize that and I could change that, then I become more nearly at one with myself. If I can say, I shouldn't lie to myself, because if I lie to myself, then I don't know where I am really in the world.
Right.
Okay, so I don't want to lie to anybody, because if I lie to anybody, I got to lie to me first. So I don't want to tell lies. If you're gonna worship a God, just get one. Don't get 25 of them. One's enough, and you're not going to be able to handle that one anyway. So just take it easy with the one God. And you go through the Ten Commandments. Honor thy father and thy mother. What a terrible thing! They've lived longer than you, and they've known you since you were born. Actually, they've known you since before you were born. Actually,
That's true.
So they know more about you than you do. So you ought to give them honor for that. Yes, they are very much aware that you have a mind of your own. They've been paying attention to that for some time.
Yes.
Okay, but you see, if we're at one with ourselves and we have our programming so that it works for us rather than against us, then what we can experience is when you say, okay, where is the spiritual influence, therefore? Because these are things that I do. Okay, these are things that I can do in the physical world, but I still have this B1 influence is still there, and it gives me an entity that I don't have otherwise. Okay. All right. The same thing is true if you go to harmony function. If you go to harmony function, you say, okay, what's that? What's going on with that? How is it that I can do? How is it I can be in harmony with somebody else? Well, rather than saying that person has to be in harmony with me, I can say that I have to be in harmony with that person, which means that I have to move how I assemble the world to accommodate how that person is. Okay, and that allows me to be in harmony with somebody else. If I want to do something, which is the third function, the way that I can do anything is through communication. Because if I'm going to build a bridge, or if I'm going to pave a road, or if I'm going to plant a garden, no matter what it is I do, the reason why I do it is going to be related to communication.
Okay.
Okay. Now, here's the thing: if I can't lie about things, I want to remember I got to be at one with myself. Okay.
Yep.
So what do I communicate? I have to communicate information. And what is information? Information is only information if you can use it the same as I can use it.
Right. So
then it's information.
Right. So the example of putting a road in, like, everybody who's on doing that has to understand what's being done. Why communication has to be.
Why am I putting money in the tax kitty? Well, so that I can get a road in here. That's why.
Yep.
And that road coming in here, gives me more income, so that my tax money paid me back and then some. Okay. Well, that's harmony, and that's being at one, and that's do all three in one idea. Yes.
That's how you get there.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think those are functions of the Spirit.
Excuse me.
I think that those are functions of the Spirit, because I think that those are things that are more than self.
Right. Well, They include other people. So,
Well, I think it's more than self. That means it's more than that other person's self. It's more than myself. It's more than ourselves.
right.
It's something that's larger than that.
Right. It's exponential.
Exponentially larger.
Yes.
Okay. So if I look at it from that perspective, I say, okay, is that the manifestation of the Spirit? Is that a function of the Spirit to be building or to be constructing reality? And if I think about it from that perspective, then I have to say, okay, if that's what's really happening, then what is it that I can accomplish through agreeing with the Spirit, or adjusting my programming, or adjusting my actions so the Spirit has a clearer pathway of expression?
Right. So cleaning, adjusting programming.
Right.
And being in harmony.
Right.
Seeing the
moving how I assemble the world,
right.
to how somebody else assembles the world, to say, okay, well, that also works. Just because I grew up thinking this way doesn't mean that's the only way the world can be. How provincial.
Exactly.
And then the third thing is communicating of information. And why would I? I don't believe it. I need a road. Well, somebody has to come along and say, okay, well, look, the reason why you need a road is so that you make more money, because you can get your goods down to the market, and you can spend. But then I have to work harder. Well, yeah, but you got kids that come along here, and they want to eat too. So if we want to feed those kids, then we need to take care of them, and the way we take care of them is we put a road in.
Yep.
So the road isn't for you as much as it is for your children. Oh, okay. Well, that makes pretty good sense, I guess. That's the reason why a man plants an orchard. He doesn't plant the orchard for himself. He plants the orchard for his grandchildren. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Because that orchard's going to continue on through generations.
That's right. And so you have to think about what that means, really, in terms of being more than self. Because that's one of the definitions of the Spirit, is that it's a supra self entity, or meta-programming entity. Okay, in other words, it has functions that are more than self. And so because of the influence that I've had with Lily and through other people, I ended up thinking about the Spirit in terms of how it expresses throughout all of us, not as it manifests for me. Okay.
Larger than self.
Yes.
Yeah.
More than self.
More than self.
Yeah. Not necessarily larger than, but more than.
Okay. That's a different way of looking at things.
Well, it's a way of looking at things. I don't know how different it is. I think there are greater minds than mine that have considered these issues. I'm just happen to be in a position where I can consider them with tools that maybe other people haven't had available for them. I don't think I'm particularly gifted or anything like that. It's just that I had to think about it this way.
Right.
And it's kind of an interesting way of thinking about things, certainly, but it does have its rewards as well.
That is true.
Well, I think that's enough for
one session. Yes, I think that was that is a lot of food for thought for everybody listening.
Okay.
We can continue next session, and
okay, we can
pick up from here. And so I think that's a wrap. Thank you everyone for watching. And before you go, please hit that subscribe button. Hit that icon bell so you get notified when our next episodes are up. And we will see you next time around.